So anytime you have you're making a sequence of choices over time, by a set of rules, you're doing a computation. Cesar Hidalgo, I think I left that link, which is why I'm a fan of his. He's an MIT economist, and he's talking about collective intelligence, in terms of economies. But he talks about how a plant is an intelligent agent. It is doing computation. It's measuring inputs, sunlight, water. It's making decisions. It's reacting to its environment, and it changes and grows. So at the abstract fundamental level, a plant is performing computation. And I think a lot of, like you say, people think when you say computation, they mean PCs and smartphones. But there's another link. Another level of computation is the vending machine. It's a computer without memory. I think we talked about that. They're otherwise known as finite state automata. So one of the things I'm getting to in robotics is language. Language and learning. How do you talk to a robot, basically? And looking at the structures of language. And I'm looking at natural language is actually more like a symphony. And if you listen to a symphony, you can pick out different instruments. You can find a flute, you can find a drum, you can find the horns. And then if you think about it, a symphony, if that one player, there'll be sheet music, an orchestration that says what that player is supposed to play, what notes and what sequence. So you can break down a symphony into a whole bunch of what you could call formal languages. That's the player sitting there in front, reading the lines of music, making the instrument make the sounds that are, the rules. So out of each one of those can be considered a formal language, and each player playing their instrument can be considered a computational process. Each one is formal, but you add them all up together, you can get something which is not formal. So if you look at how we talk using natural language, there's different threads in it, and that's what I'm exploring, programming hardware-wise. Can you pick out different threads in how we talk to each other? That if I pull out certain words, can I use those to talk to a robot? But we can come back to that another day. But that's, again, I guess what I'm trying to say is the instrument playing in a symphony is a form of computation. You can look at it that way. But one of the things that Stephen Wolfram keeps coming back to is that complicated things don't have to come from complicated things. Very simple things can give rise to infinite complexity. And I think one of our problems, a lot of an understanding of science and world philosophy, is that we keep thinking life and consciousness and all this is complicated. So it must be coming out of something complicated. But Stephen Wolfram is saying, no, simple rule sets, he talks about rule 30. It's an 8-rule single one-dimensional automaton. And that gives you a completely random output. So you have 8 rules, completely deterministic, and you get an output which is random by any measure that we can come up with. The other fascinating one is Rule 110. And it's the one I like to focus on. It's imagine a checkerboard, which is just one square wide, but goes on forever in each direction. And then you have pieces that you play on this one-dimensional checkerboard and jumping, and there's rules. And so the cells either have checkers on them or not. Rule 110, 8 rules. It tells you that turns out to be Turing complete.
I was going to say, it sounds exactly like a Turing machine when you were describing it.
It works out to be this one-dimensional checker game with 8 rules for how to move pieces. Turns out to be capable of doing any computation that any electronic digital computer that's ever been whatever could be made can do. So that's where Stephen Wolfram is coming from, is that realization that you can start out with something so basic and get infinite complexity out of that. So you don't need a lot of very complex explanations for life.
So maybe a little bit later on, I'll share my one. I've been playing around with an idea of one simple rule, and maybe I'll share that a little bit later, because I mean, there's all these overlaps. You know, truth is truth.
So starting with this idea that physics and math is a discovery process, just like it's a creative process, let's put it that way. One of the things that Thomas Kuhn did is he was a working physicist, but he got into the history of physics and how it's actually been done over the centuries, going back to Plato. And in this regard, I just want to put a plug in. If you have any listeners who is a young person who wants to go on a major in physics, the book you have to read is Pierre Duhaime's To Save the Phenomena. And I have a list of the 5 most influential books in my life, and that's on that list. And it's essentially, it's an academic, it's a history of physical theory from Plato to Galileo. And it's all the stuff that you don't learn in school. And that was Thomas Kuhn's complaint, is that when we learn physics, we learn physics, it basically starts with Galileo. But he said, if you take an art class, if you take a music class, you learn the history of music, of instruments across cultures, across time. And you learn music theory at different episodes. But he said, in science, we don't do that. So it's sterile. And another way to look at it is, if you look at some of the cathedrals, and we say they're elegant, they're beautiful, but we're looking at the cathedral after it was finished, after the scaffolding was taken away. We don't see all of the fits and starts, the 2 or 3 times the building collapsed while they were trying to build it. They had to change the design. So when we learn in math and physics, we're learning the distilled, cleaned up, polished version of stuff. And so as science majors often get the idea that science is somehow this perfect thing, that it was just born that way, where in fact, like Thomas Kuhn would point out, Pierre Duhaime would definitely show you, is that science is messy. It's the proverbial going into the kitchen and seeing the sausage being made. And it's very, very much a human activity. And if you look at it that way, then there's leaps of faith. There's craziness. People try stuff, it fails. So that's how I approach physics. That's how I think George, or Greg Chayton, approaches it. It's a process of discovery. You're a pioneer, you're an explorer, you're going into the jungle, or you're going into the Rocky Mountains. You don't know what's there. Your intuition, your guesswork, your experience, you take chances. Sometimes you win, sometimes you don't. So you always have to look at physics and math as a process of discovery and what kind of vistas open up.